The product of two complex numbers is always, sometimes, or never a complex number. Okay, well, let's start by refreshing our memory of what a complex number is. Complex numbers take the form a plus bi. These are complex. Now, if the a term is 0, so you have something like 0 plus bi, the 0 term cancels out, so you essentially just have bi. Now that's an imaginary number, but it is also still complex. It's just a subset of the complex numbers. Now let's say your b value was 0, a plus 0i. Well, now the imaginary part cancels out, and now you just have a, and now you have a real number. But the real number is also still a complex number. It's just a subset of the complex numbers. So let's take some examples over here. Let's say we did, 3 plus 2i, and then 4 plus i. Yeah. So we can actually multiply this out using the distributive property. I'm going to have 3 times 4 plus i. I'm going to have 2i times 4 plus i. 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times I is 3i. 2i times 4 is 8i. And 2i times I is 2i squared. Let's do this part first. The I squared is a -1, which makes this a -2. So I have 12 plus -2, that gets me 10. And then I have 3i plus 8i, which gets me 11i. So in this case, we had a real number, a complex number that had both a real and an imaginary component. You can also use something called the complex conjugate, where if we did 3 plus 2i, but instead, now if I multiply it by 3 minus 2i, I would get the same, kind of the same thing. We're going to get 3 minus 2i plus 2i, 3 minus 2i. 3 times 3 is 9, minus 3 times -2i is -6i. And then 2i times 3 is positive 6i. And then 2i times -2i is -4i squared. This I squared becomes a -1, so this becomes a positive 4. So then I'm going to have 9 plus 4 gives me 13, and then the -6i and the positive 6i cancel each other out. So then this is going to be a number in the form of just the a part, which is a real number. But remember, it is also a complex number. So even when I multiply by the complex conjugate, I get a real number in a complex number. And let's say I just took two imaginary numbers. If I just did, for example, 2i times 3, here's an imaginary number times a real number, then I get 6i. So this is an imaginary result. It's just the bi part, but it is also, remember, still a subset of the complex numbers. So we're going to choose always.